Well, the Olympics are over, right? They're over? Okay. I didn't really watch too much of it. I didn't get caught up in everything. But I caught a few things on the Olympics, and one of them was what was going on with this crazy swimmer who said some things he didn't really do, and he's getting in trouble for it. And I thought about that. And then I thought how much time was being spent telling us about it. And then I saw something on Facebook which I hadn't really seen before, and it was a pole vaulter who was running hard down the line, and he heard the national anthem and stopped. He stopped. And out of respect, he stood looking for where the flag was. And I thought about the difference between these two people. I thought it was interesting. Someone a little bit more maybe on the arrogant side, I can't say for sure, and someone showing respect, care, and concern. And then I started thinking about these athletes that I may have some inkling or knowledge about. Mike Trout was a baseball player who's originally from this area, I believe. He plays for the Angels. And I thought of Tim Tebow, and I think of Robert Clemente. Had to put some old guys in there for some of them like us. Derek Jeter. I'm not a New York fan, but he's in the pool. What do they have in common? Well, they're successful, they're good, very good at what they do, some better than others. But they're humble. They have humility. It's amazing. I was doing a little bit of reading on Derek Jeter because I can't watch anybody from New York. Obviously, I didn't have a lot of knowledge about him. And if you're a New York fan, bear with me, okay? But he doesn't say anything about his stats. He doesn't say anything about how he plays himself. He's concerned about how his team has done. Everything is the team. Everything is for the better good. Even when he was a child growing up in the sport, no one ever saw him as a boastful young child who would say, I'm going to make it to the majors, look at me, or who would ever get in the way of his other teammates and support him. So, what does that tell me about humility? Well, humility is not a weakness. Humility is a strength. We think that if we're humble, we will never be successful. Just because 95% of the people who are successful are not humble doesn't make it the right path. I can guarantee you. Derek Jeter, one of the best out there right now, is a humble human being and able to be extremely good and successful. So I thought about this word, humility. And in the first reading, you hear it from Sirach. Humble yourself. This was written about 200 years before Christ even entered this earth. And there was two cultures that were kind of competing with each other. One was very similar to today's world, and the other was from the religious side. So you could equate it to maybe how we think about our faith and how much we practice it, to how much the world calls us away from some of the things that our faith calls us to. There was a struggle, and Sirach had to talk to this struggle and talked about how important humility was. Be conscious, very conscious of our limitations, of who we really are. We are creatures created by God, and we are sinners. We are imperfect. He tells us that in so many words. Higher and mightier you and I are, the more we are in desperate need of humility. There's no way that I can truly be open to God's grace if I am not humble. It's a word we hear and we just don't quite think we really have to be there. The gospel. It's teaching about entering the kingdom of heaven, and you cannot do it unless you're this humble human being. Christ says the exalted will be humbled, and the humble will be exalted. There is a life after where we are now. Jesus promises us that. And if we truly believe that, then we would recognize how critical, how important humility in our lives really is. Even in Jesus' time, when Luke wrote this, you've got the competing, if you will, of that the Greek and Roman world to that of the Jewish faith of the one true God and all that God was teaching. And Jesus comes in the middle of it and turns everything upside down with all his words. The humble are going to be exalted? That's not what they were seeing at that time. There were no leaders at that particular time who were humble. So how could people believe what Jesus had said? There is a next life. There is a next life. We, as well as those that Luke wrote for, need to believe in that. And if we do, we will live every minute to gain that heavenly kingdom. There's many houses in God's heaven. We hear that. I'm not sure how low of a house in heaven, how good it is or how bad it is. All I know is that God, in his words today, tells us to be humble. I started thinking about this, and there are, historically speaking, others in our own American history who were and learned about humility. George Washington and even Ben Franklin struggled with it their whole life, trying to see what is, if you will, what is the meaning of life. And they found that there was much to be gained in humility. It wasn't the power, it was a total different concern on their part. They didn't think greatness at any price was real greatness. That's not what they saw. What they were trying to do was to help their fellow man. They're the ones that saw how important virtue really was, and that in itself was a great reward for themselves. It wasn't all of the Ben Franklin's inventions, and it wasn't all that George Washington did that made them satisfied. In the humbleness of recognizing how much they were able to help others, and all they did was what drew them more later in their life to see what truth really was. They found tremendous joy in guiding and helping others. Humility equals freedom. Humility equals freedom. And you're not going to hear that in the corporate world. But if you are truly, truly humble, you'll find complete joy and relief from the stress that we try to put ourselves under to gain and to do and to be on top of. Humility is not a weakness, it is a strength. Think about it as having courage, but having that courage quietly. Call it a quiet courage. Again, Jesus reminds us, the humble are those who will receive the heavenly kingdom. Do we truly, truly believe that in our hearts? Have we offered ourselves up so much to Christ and all that he has to say to us in how we live that we believe this in our hearts? We're imperfect and we will not live perfect lives. So, are we at least trying to live in that direction? Or is it just something we like to hear at church and take away, and when I get out into the real world, all bets are off? Christ is offering us an opportunity to change our hearts, to open up our hearts, and to recognize the truth of the humble man. May we always strive to be humble, trusting in the freedom that humility will and can bring us. Amen.